Welcome to Transforming Us podcast. I'm Jess.
And I'm Tamara. We're trauma-informed relationship coaches and old friends here to discuss common patterns and what leads us to paths of security.
You know, people are feeling overwhelmed and disconnected in their painful relationships, which often leads to mental health crises.
We want to share some new ideas and practices to help you cultivate curiosity, compassion, and to redeem the patterns in your relationships, starting with yourself.
Join us on this journey of transforming us. Grab a cup of coffee and let's dive in. Hey guys, welcome back. In today's episode, we are exploring the anxious, preoccupied, insecure attachment style. So if you joined us in the last episode, we did a run through of secure attachment and all of the insecure styles. So today we are going in depth and going to give you all the nitty gritty details of each way that style will show up in relationships, but also just the internal world of what's going on for them. We'll just start though with Tamara. How you doing?
I'm doing really, really good. We just got back from a trip. I was very, very thankful we were able to go down to St. Thomas and St. John. Taylor and I took both of our teen daughters, and it's crazy how, which I know everybody can attest to, but like just getting away and truly being able to like reframe your mind again and come back, you're just so refreshed. So I feel really good.
Yeah, no, I love that you got to get away and get that trip with your family and just rest and recover. Planning those couple times a year is so important for your soul.
So Jess, how are you doing?
I'm doing really good. We have also done some traveling. So yeah, just taking that family time while the kids are out of school. And we went to Tennessee. You know, we have some land in Tennessee. So we got to stay at our property and then enjoy some time in East Tennessee. There is a indoor water park called Wilderness of the Smokies. So our kids love that.
That's cool.
It's a great way to just like stay and play and, really fun in the winter too.
That's awesome.
But yeah, and then something I had looked forward to for a really long time is getting to see Cades Cove, which is in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and getting to just park at all the stops and see these historic old log cabins and beautiful valley with horses and wild turkeys and sometimes bears, nestled between these giant mountains. It was really breathtaking. Yeah, and the light was good. It was something I've wanted to do for a while. We hadn't gotten over there, so.
That's awesome. I'm glad you got to do that.
Yeah, it's been a sweet time with our family in between sports and school stuff.
So important.
Yeah. So getting into attachment styles today, I know that I've mentioned having an insecure, like anxious leaning. And for a long time, I really felt like that was my insecure style, was more of this anxious, preoccupied leaning. And I'll probably share more of my story later, but I have that tendency, but I also have some of the avoidance. So I think that fearful avoidant is maybe where I landed, but for a very long time, this is where I felt like I lived and understood myself to operate in relationships. So I guess let's get into it.
Okay. So through this episode, we're talking about the anxious preoccupied, which is also known as AP. So if you hear us say the AP, that's what we're referring to. But, thinking about this style, Jess, you kind of have touched on it some already a little bit, but like, how would you describe this style as far as their feelings about relationships specifically?
Yeah, I think that it's in the name that there's this anxiety in relationships and just wondering and feeling worried that you're not doing enough or that they're mad at you or, that would be common for an anxious, preoccupied person to just never feel calm. Or, well, I wouldn't say never feel calm. They can go to that anxious place often. So they usually react when somebody needs some space from them or wants to disconnect. That's going to be very uncomfortable to just be alone.
Yeah. It can be very triggering. For sure.
Yeah.
So when we talk about the anxious preoccupied, we know anxious and anxiety is part of that name. And so when I think about an AP, they generally are very like they want to show up really well in the relationship. They're very typically loving, they're givers, they really highly value the relationship in the sense of connection. But because of the struggles of the insecure attachment, it can become very anxiety producing, as far as like an example would be, if they're texting and, they're having a conversation and then their partner, takes hours to respond. And all of a sudden their minds are starting to spiral, of
Mm-hmm.
like, what's happening? Why are they not? Where are they? And or checking their location, or
Yeah.
seeing has their snap score gone up, or when was they last active on Instagram. Like those are kind
Yeah.
of common things that APs will do. And you know it's hard because that anxiety, once it rises, it's like, and there's that fear of abandonment, a
Right.
lot of them have, and
Yeah.
so they can really spiral out pretty quick, I think.
Yeah. They're like, why aren't you responding to me? Yeah.
Right. Right. They're wanting that connection, and and they'll automatically start thinking, I think a lot of times, like the worst,
Mm-hmm.
because
Right.
they've generally, sometimes, I mean, they have, those past wounds
For sure.
that they get triggered by.
Yeah. Yeah. And then also thinking about like in terms of emotions, they're high anxiety. There's also a scale of sadness that we look at with all these different attachment styles. And, anxious preoccupied would tend to be higher on the sadness scale, where again, with just emotions, they're just like on the surface. Um, I think about that just tears and crying a lot, like grasping at like, I want reassurance. I want you to remind me of my worth, and just feeling like just sad a lot, like disappointed a lot, that those would be common experiences for an anxious, preoccupied person because they don't feel secure.
Yeah. And I feel like, even, when we talk about like the anger scale, I feel like a lot of times, because they fear being left or abandoned, a lot of times they will end up keeping things inside. And they're just, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times they'll bottle it up. And it's interesting because we don't typically think about, um, the AP being avoidant, but like there is a level of avoidance to themselves
With
because
anger.
they're abandoning their own needs in order to
Mm-hmm.
try to stay in good graces with their partner. So
Yeah.
it's hard because they're not fully being real with themselves, because they're not showing
Mm-hmm.
up secure and having those conversations of, hey, vetting for my needs in a healthy way. What does that look like? Like, this is
Yeah.
important to me, or this kind of hurt my feelings. You probably didn't mean for it to, but it kind of hurt my feelings the other day when you said that. Having those kind
Yeah.
of conversations to work through conflict. They want to avoid the conflict or will hold it in because of the fear of being, left.
They definitely have that avoidance when it comes to anger, and not so much with the sadness and anxiety, but then if you look at the avoidance that you're in the other styles, that would be avoidance in relationships. And so coming to this anxious preoccupied, they're low on the avoidance scale of avoiding in relationships or avoiding vulnerability. They lean into connection, they lean into feelings, they lean into needs. That's where they're the most comfortable. So when it comes to the avoidance scale, they might avoid anger, but many of the other relational things, and that would be their own anger, probably sensitive to other people's anger too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it just boils down to they're going to be more attuned and caring ultimately about the partner's emotional space than their own,
Yeah.
because they're going to want to do everything they can to make sure that person's good and happy, and that
Yeah.
they're satisfied, and they can end up suppressing their own
Right.
needs.
Yeah, for sure. And also they tend to overshare, again with that leaning into connection and being verbal processors a lot of the times they tend to overshare about, their own needs and what's going on for them and what they want and how others should show up for them. And it's that is one of those things that tends to be a complaint of of people for that style is that they will not process internally themselves before just like dumping it,
Mm-hmm.
on other people. So it's something to think about.
The next thing is self-esteem, and the question of, how does the anxious, preoccupied attachment style affect self-esteem?
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that the self-esteem is, it tends to be lower because they're not is they feel like they're so afraid of being left and abandoned, instead of having this, this mindset of like, I'm a great partner, not in a cocky way, but just like knowing their worth, knowing that,
Mm-hmm.
I know what I'm worth. I know I'm a high value person. I know I show up well in my relationships. I love, I communicate, I care. Just these healthy, like objective truths that they have, can know in confidence about themselves.
Yeah.
And, but a lot of times they're so afraid of losing the connection, and which, always goes back to that fear of abandonment. But, I feel like a lot of times the APs can really start to shift and become more secure when they start truly understanding and having like a healthy self-esteem,
Mm-hmm.
of knowing like, my worth. And
Yeah.
that's a game changer.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about it's almost like a helplessness, needing reassurance and not trusting themselves and reaching for their partner or for a friend or someone to help them feel secure again.
Yeah.
And so just remembering like I'm not a victim and,
Mm-hmm.
growing in that agency, that
Yeah.
internal power to
Mm-hmm.
say like I'm good, I can do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Learning how to have like positive internal dialogue,
Yeah.
self-talk. Yeah.
Right, for sure. Um, and so boundaries, there's a range with all these attachment styles on whether they are good at setting boundaries or not. Anxious preoccupied, they just are not good at setting boundaries.
No.
They are so focused on other people's needs and making people happy that it is hard for them to say no. And so
Mm-hmm.
obviously they take on too much, they do too much for others, they get overwhelmed by maybe being taken advantage of or something like that. But then you also kind of teach people how to treat you. That's something that you got to learn to set boundaries so that you can have that space to yourself and that your needs matter. Yeah, and I think just learning to assert, like you said, vetting for your needs and
Mm-hmm.
and assert what those are is a skill to just practice.
Yeah. And I think with setting boundaries, I do think it's interesting because I feel like we can learn so much about ourselves and growing secure when we're in
Mm-hmm.
relationships, because we're able to actually practice what it is that we're learning.
Mm.
So learning how to, if your partner is like, hey, can you da 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 da,
Mm-hmm.
and if it doesn't work for you, being able to just in a loving way say, I'm not gonna be able to do that today, but I can
Mm-hmm.
help you at this time.
Yeah.
Or, not dropping everything because they want to people please.
If you want to show up for people, you can't overcommit
Mm-hmm.
yourself. You have to say no to some things so that you can give a good yes to what matters most
Right.
and prioritize certain things. So
Yeah.
you are less likely to disappoint people if you say yes to only what you can really commit to.
Right. It makes
So,
me think about, with the airplane, with the model of, the air mask. They
mm,
always tell you to put the air mask on yourself first before you put it on somebody else. And
yeah.
I think, we get, especially like you talked about in the South in the last episode, we're used to like being, kind and like conscious of other people. But like, if we're not taking care of ourselves, not in a selfish way, but in a sense of like, there's a health in being able to make sure, like, I have to be good mentally,
Hmm.
emotionally, spiritually, physically before I can be good for someone else. Because if I'm not
Yeah.
good, I'm not going to be good for you. I'm not going to be the best friend I can be. I'm not going to be the best mom or wife that I can be,
Yeah.
like if I'm not well. So like reframing your mindset on, you know, having boundaries and self-care is actually not only me taking care of myself, but that is what's going to make me show up well for other
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. And so then with this style, how they view connection, we've already kind of said this, but they just really want connection. And so that form is just emotional connection. I want attunement. I don't want to ever have a break in that, because then I'm almost fearing that abandonment of like, when will it return? And so remembering that, like we said, the self-soothing in disconnection is vital for this attachment style. So,
Yeah.
and we'll get into more of the actual tips for growth at the end of this episode. So hang in there. And I think we're just going through the patterns
Sure.
to begin with. But
right.
So what about independence?
I think I think the APs have a much harder time with independence. It's really sweet, the heart of it, but they love so deeply, and they are just the type that would be like all in, and they would give you like the shirt off their back. And so, they can be independent, but I feel like they're so much more naturally like leaning in to the people in their life that they love, which, they just have to be aware and be careful that it doesn't become codependency. Because, when you think about relationships, there is a healthy form of interdependency. I mean, when we're in a relationship with someone, we want to be able to be there for each other and bring the best, in life to someone else, which is being able to talk and trust and, the other person and let them in. But at the same time, not becoming so dependent that it becomes codependent that, I have to be with you in order to feel regulated or to feel like that's my identity. Because a lot of APs can, not even meaning to, but can lose themselves in the relationship because that person, in a sense, becomes a form of part of their identity. So I think about like checking in with your mind, checking in with your heart, if you do tend to lean into that, because, you want to build up your life to be your life. And so when someone comes in and you start dating someone and having this relationship, they're an addition to your already great life that you're building. They aren't your life. They shouldn't be your life, because then you're putting way too much focus on someone who can't bear the weight of your soul.
Yes.
So,
So good. Yeah, really important to remember that like your partner does not complete you, and you don't need to be in a relationship to feel okay. That's huge growth for the anxious preoccupied.
Yeah.
So then when it comes to like voice, them having a voice or expressing their needs with their voice, they tend to focus on other people's needs, but then there is this aspect of protesting or voicing needs, when they're feeling sad or they're feeling anxious, and like, again, asking for that reassurance, asking to hear that they matter to their partner, stuff like that. So would you agree with that?
Yeah.
But then, it's so common that an anxious preoccupied will be in a relationship with a dismissive avoidant. And then what you see is that the thing they want the most, which is that reassurance, that connection, that feedback, is kind of withheld a lot of the time because the other person is creating that space and self-regulating on their own and stuff.
Right.
And so it creates a higher level of anxiety. And then what you see playing out is the pursuer is the anxious preoccupied, and the distancer is the dismissive avoidant.
Right.
And, and now there could be a fearful avoidant mixed in there, depending, but any type of avoidance is going to trigger the anxious preoccupied.
Right. And I don't think we've actually said this to the people listening yet, but depending on how familiar, if you're listening, how familiar you are with attachments, it's very common to see the insecure attachment styles go to the opposite of them. So a lot of times, we'll see an anxious, preoccupied will end up partnering with more of an avoidant, whether it's fearful or dismissive avoidant, because they're drawn to the opposites. So like for the AP, they're drawn to that more stoic, independent nature because that's not their typical way. So to me, they're like, oh, that's kind of interesting. It's intriguing. It's mysterious. Like I'm so drawn to that. And then for the avoidant, they're so drawn to the APs because they're like, oh, they're so warm and they're so in touch with their emotions and they're so expressive and I feel so loved by them. And, so it's like it's mirroring the opposites of each other. So they're naturally, subconsciously drawn to each other. And so the very things that end up being the thing that initially draws them ends up being a lot of times what ends up becoming the problem, because once they're triggered and once their attachment style is in activation mode, they are so opposite. And
Mm.
so the anxious is wanting and bidding for connection. And then the avoidant is like, whoa, too much connection. I love you, but this is
Yeah.
scaring me and I'm backing off. And it
Yeah.
becomes this, they call it the anxious avoidant trap. So I did want to just say that because I don't
Yeah.
think we've talked about that yet.
I love that. And I'm so glad you brought it up because, like, again, why do they gravitate towards them? There's this reenactment from, your childhood wounds. There are things that played out when you were so young that becomes what feels familiar, which feels safe, even though it may not be functional or healthy in a lot of ways, and you may mentally desire something different. You're emotionally and somatically just playing out the same pattern that you know so well. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you're that anxious preoccupied and you maybe had a dismissive avoidant parent, you're saying subconsciously, again, all subconscious, I like this. This feels like home. I'm going to get in this relationship, and when they distance, I know how to get their attention and bring them back to me. And that trap, like you said, they're just playing it back out until you learn the patterns and can shift some of yours and move towards security. You can either help create security in your already committed relationship, or choose a secure relationship, choose a secure partner if you're
Yeah.
still looking for that person.
And then the more that we work on becoming secure, the more the insecure attachment relationships that we find ourselves in, we will walk away from,
Mm-hmm.
because we're learning how to show up more for ourselves. We're learning more healthy mindsets. So the insecure attachment styles actually end up becoming kind of off-putting, because you're like, I want to find someone who can show up
Yeah.
secure like how I'm showing up for them. Like I don't really have the
Yeah.
patience to wait around on this person who's doing this push-pull dynamic. Like that
Yeah.
is not attractive to me anymore.
Well, it's like when you get to a place of security, it's almost like you're emotionally saying, I'm not playing the game anymore.
Right.
And I don't need that. I can
Right.
just be clear and kind and direct, and know that I'm worth it. And if they
Right.
don't see that, then those might be relationships that I walk away from, because it's not healthy. It's not going to be a good thing.
Yeah.
So let's talk
It's not
about
fulfilling.
care. Yeah. Let's talk about care and help. So this style tends to ask for help a lot, and they tend to, they would be attuned to other people's needs, but they also have this, maybe helplessness, that they're needing that support, needing that person to kind of walk through with them in things. I think of, you know, anxious, preoccupied people is often, especially in close relationships, maybe not at work always, but enjoy being helped or led along, and then obviously helping others along the way, just being very attuned to other people's needs. But yeah, so what do you think about receiving care from others?
I think the APs don't have any problem receiving care, because they love the connection so much. So any chance they can be close to their partner, they'll take it. And I feel like also it helps them feel loved, because
Mm-hmm.
they're feeling attended to and attuned to. So I don't think they have any problem receiving help and care. Like I think it kind of feeds something, because it's feeding the closeness.
For sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So as far as common wounds for this attachment style and just the messages that were received as a child that were internalized.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to start
Yeah,
off with that.
sure.
Okay.
I think that desire to fix other people and like wanting to attune to them and hyper empathy, is really common, but it's sort of that I need to fix this. So the message you might hear internally is, oops, you did something wrong. You need to fix it, or it could be this sense of I'm not good enough. I need to be better. So they could be like the good girl that's just always trying to earn her love, or, a man that is a perfectionist or something like that. Just needing to um, work for love. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the part about that attachment style that I feel like makes me sad when you really think about it, because it's like, it's just, yeah, and it's like their own expectation they put on themselves, but feeling like I'm not deserving, so I have to earn and work for love.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of the APs, if they're growing into health and secure attachment, you realize like no amount of loving is going to make someone stay. Like you can't love someone into loving you. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
I feel like a mind shift also happens in people when they realize like, if I'm a loving person and I show up, myself, and I show up, healthy and balanced where I can take care of myself but also be available to other people, I feel like it also helps like earn respect from the other person as well. Because if you can show up and have healthy boundaries and communication, the other person will respect you even more for that. Whereas a lot of the APs will abandon themselves for the sake of love.
Mm-hmm.
But then a lot of times it doesn't necessarily mean that person's going to stick around, because if they have insecure attachment style or avoidant attachment, they're going to end up withdrawing regardless. So then it
Mm-hmm.
makes the AP feel even worse,
Yeah.
because they have done everything, and they still didn't feel chosen in the end.
Yeah.
So that makes me really, it's
It
sad
is
when you think
sad.
about, how they end up feeling. So it just
Yeah.
goes to show like the importance of self-care, taking care of yourself. Like that's not selfish, that's healthy, so that you can, you know, show up well for other people too.
Right, right. Yeah, and it all comes from trauma. I think that that's
Yeah.
just really important
Yeah.
to remember, and that these aren't giant traumas. They're very small,
Right.
often emotionally unmet needs or inconsistencies. So, like in this case with anxious preoccupied, you have intermittent reinforcement from a parent. So they would sometimes be really great and it would feel amazing. And then other times they were busy. Think about our generation, like kids that were in after school care and both parents working. And then, maybe you just, again, it's just life. You jump right into a sport right after school. And so how much actual time do you have to process how you're doing with your parents? Like not a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe bedtime. So it's just that can take its toll, I think, and is just important to remember. But the trauma responses of an anxious preoccupied would be that hyper responsibility, maybe perfectionism, over accommodation. Like I said in the last episode, it's characterized by this fawning response and people pleasing and wanting others to not be upset with them. Yeah, just apologizing. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Being sorry for everything is so common. And there's a lot of stress with that emotional disconnection. So, that anxiety and then a hypervigilance to just quickly act on things. You'll see that. So, but yeah, I think you want to talk a little bit about the parent
Sure.
experience.
Yeah. So I think as far as like parent responsiveness to just the physical emotional needs during childhood for this style is, just trying to be, as consistent as you can. And, we're not going to be perfect parents. Like we could try on our very best day. Like we're going to break. I mean, we're going to break the attunement cycle. We're going to have to go back and repair. And I think the biggest thing is the repair, like making sure that you're, when the child is having communication or trying to tell you something, like making sure that you're listening, making sure you're attuning and that you're like, and you're listening and you're caring. And then, if something comes up and your phone rings and you got to take the phone call, like, but then being able to come back and say, oh, sorry, I just had to take that call because it was work and they've been waiting on me, but I want to finish telling me what you were saying. And you're making that child feel seen, heard, valued. And, I just think about like making sure that they know, like, hey, I'm going to love you even on your best and your worst day.
Mm-hmm.
Like you don't have to earn and work for my love. I
Yeah.
love you just as you are. And, I love you if you made an F on that paper or an A on that paper. Like, I care that you tried. You know what I mean? Like, not feeling like it's such a performance based love or an acceptance.
Mm.
Like, something like just that vulnerability, um, and taking ownership, like, is huge.
Yeah.
And I feel like that factors in, you know, no matter what attachment style they lean to, like, that helps them see and have a model for like what secure communication looks like,
Mm-hmm.
because parents are not going to get it right. And I feel like we have to like really cut ourselves some slack, because I feel like
Yeah.
we can have all this parent guilt, but it's like at the same time, no parent is going to get it right all the time. Like, we're flawed people, and so we're going to wound our children.
Yeah.
But it's just trying to repair, and I think being real, and coming back,
Right.
trying to do our best to love well and own our stuff.
It's a really good, overview of what it's like to be a parent who maybe has this anxious preoccupied leaning. I do think with, all of this stuff, again, we've said is subconscious, so much of it, we're not intentionally, playing out these insecure patterns, but there's a set of beliefs that come with each insecure style. And so I'd love to just share some of the internal world that goes on. So, in terms of anxious preoccupied and how they feel about themselves, or maybe some of the internal beliefs and messages, is I need reassurance. I need help. I don't trust myself. So always looking for that other person to help them feel secure. This is how you see sometimes, not just women, but often women get into an abusive relationship is I can't be alone. I need this person. And even though they don't treat me that well, this is somebody that I can feel like I have a sense of security just being in a relationship. So, growing in that self-trust and that self-worth is important. And then the close relationship beliefs, like what would you say for those?
As far as close relationship beliefs, I mean, we have touched on this, as far as, they value that intimacy and that closeness, and they just have to be aware that, they can still hold some independence. They can, because they're going to naturally value connection over independence. I know for me, when I was growing up, my mom was a single parent, and it was just me and her, and that was my family, my mom and me. And I watched how she had all these really close relationships with these friends of hers, these other women. And, that was modeled to me at a young age, that connection with those friendships were like her lifeline. Like, they were like a family to her. So it
Mm-hmm.
held a lot of importance for me to watch that modeled. And, and therefore I grew up, in my relationships and friendships are very important to me. But I think that, for the AP, they just are going to have to kind of keep kind of checking their mind, checking their heart, and, making sure, like, no, I need to make sure, for the health of me, that I have my independence as who I am. Like,
Mm-hmm.
all these people that I love, these friendships, relationships, they are like the flowers of life. They add joy and beauty and richness and fullness to life, for
Mm-hmm.
sure. But at the end
Yeah.
of the day, I still need to be secure in myself and who I am as a person.
Yeah.
I need to have my independent, like, what makes me who I am apart from these people? Like, I want to
Mm-hmm.
know, what are my passions? What are my hobbies? What do I really enjoy doing? What do I not enjoy doing? Like, really getting a
Mm-hmm.
sense of knowing myself, and liking who I am as a person, and, like, holding space for yourself.
Yeah. And the cool thing too is that when you have that mindset that you just described, like life in general and your beliefs about life in general start to expand beyond just joy and happiness in relationships, but also when you pursue your own passions and you make time for your own interests and desires and all the things that come with you being you and valuing that. I think it's so natural for an anxious preoccupied to kind of have that anxiety in life, and maybe the world isn't safe or I need help in general, but that starts to change when they grow in security.
Yeah. They start to get that inner self confidence.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I think a common thing that a lot of people have probably heard about is this idea of self-sabotage.
Mhm.
And each insecure style has a way that they might self-sabotage. So what would you say might be for the
Yeah.
anxious preoccupied?
So I think, they will can easily self sabotage because the expectations and their needs that they put on their partner could feel smothered or like that they can't live up to the expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Or, the person could be, I mean, there's a variety of things that could happen, like almost like their lack of independence, that other person feels that, and it can just feel like a lot. Like it can just
Mm-hmm.
feel like, I really like this person, but they just need so much from me. They want to
Yeah.
talk to me all the time. Like I feel like I'm losing my independence because they're infringing so much on needing me for so
Mm,
much because they're not knowing how to self-soothe, so
right.
I think they can end up self-sabotaging if they're just insecure to where they're needing
Yeah,
that person all the time to make them feel whole.
for sure. And I some things that come to mind for me is, like over explaining, that can be an anxious behavior. And I think that shape shifting to others' wants can make it at times like, people who really want trust and directness, when they face an anxious, preoccupied person, it's like, I don't know, what do you want?
Right.
Like we're just kind of never really saying what's true for them.
Not having their own voice in a sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The other person who might be more secure is going like, can you please just be straight with me? Like, and so then your anxiety then makes people frustrated that you're not showing up real, like who
Right.
you are and what you need.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So then what are some common things they say and do? Like, let's talk about that.
Well, I think you've talked about they have a tendency to over apologize. A lot
Yeah.
of times they'll apologize for things that they do not have to apologize for. They're not doing anything wrong, but they'll still want to apologize because they're just trying to keep the peace.
Yeah.
I think that's a big one.
Yeah. I think that the please don't leave me sort of a
Mhm.
thing like is actually said often with this
Yeah.
style. When in a relationship, they're so used to hating that feeling of somebody walking away from them when they have needs. And that, like, please don't leave me. Like, please, 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 like
Hmm.
pleading, just stay, just
Yeah. The
listen to
begging.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that that's what you'll hear is that I need you. Like, don't disconnect from me. So that's what you're going to hear from an AP. So then what about what they do?
Again, I feel like we've kind of touched on this, but I feel like the things that they'll do is they're just always trying to, I think, like reach and bid for connection because that's what's
Mm-hmm.
making them feel secure. So I think, a lot of times, they can be the first to reach out, or they're the first to, you know, they just give a lot and they put in a
Mm-hmm.
lot, which again, in the end, it's like a good thing because they care, but it's like there needs to be like a balance. And so I think for people who do tend to like lean towards anxious attachment, and that's where growth work happens, relationships should be like a dance, like it's
Mm-hmm.
like kind of like a football, you're throwing it back and forth. It's like a friendship. Like you don't want to have a one-sided friendship where you're always the one calling and always the one initiating the plans and always the one making the effort and always the one like, because then eventually you're going to feel like not really appreciated or taken for granted, or
Mm-hmm.
what would this be if I didn't keep putting in all this energy and effort? Like there'd be like nothing
Yeah.
left. Like, so it's not fair to the AP. So I think like going into friendships and relationships, like that is a time of observing. That's a time that should be like used to say, okay, I'm going to give, but I also want to sit back for a second. I'm going to observe, how is this person showing up for me? And like it needs to be like that dance that goes back and forth.
Yes.
And there needs to be some balance and like mutual interest, mutual
Mm-hmm.
efforts. Like that's what you want to see.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think, we're at that point in this episode where it's just, we have given so many different explanations for the different patterns and how they show up and shared lots of tips already for growth and having that growth mindset. But is there anything else we want to share about how to achieve security for the anxious preoccupied style?
Well, from my perspective, I think so much of it starts with internally in you. And, I think from a spiritual perspective, I think that was a huge turning point for me in my growth, because I could look back when I was younger and, again, I told you about my modeling of watching my mom and her friendships. Like, friendships were so important to me. And I could find myself, I was like the type that could make a lot of friends, and friends were just like so great and I loved them. But then at the same time, like, being able to really understand who you are, like doing the work to truly like get to know yourself, and getting secure enough in your life and comfortable enough with yourself first, almost like dating yourself, like, especially for like teenagers. I guess I think about that because I'm a mom of teen girls, but like, I tell them, like, this is such a good time in your life to truly get to know who you are. Because if you can sit in that space with yourself and like who you are, and be able to like entertain yourself, and, build this life with like, your friends, and,
Mm,
find your hobbies and find your passions and travel and take the trips, and,
yeah.
like, have fun and enjoy your life as you. And then
Yeah.
when God's timing, when he brings that person in your life, like this partner, like, you're so much more grounded in who you are
Hmm.
and good with who you are, that you don't feel like I have to have you. Like, if I lose you, then I don't know who I am.
Hmm.
So I think that is growth opportunity for everyone, but especially
Yeah.
like AP leaning, because I think they're willing to walk away from something that's not healthy if
Hmm.
they really know who they are, and like have built this life for themselves that they love. And, you know, just having that awareness of like, people bring goodness and joy and blessing in my life, but like, I'm still going to be me at the end of the day. And so, like, I need to be okay and be able to still go on in my life, like, if something happens to something around me, you know what I mean? And that's where I feel like the Lord has been a huge catapult of growth, because I know at the end of the day, like, I'm not going to be alone. Like, I could have
Hmm.
a lot of things happen in my life and have loss, which would be incredibly difficult and obviously very hard to walk through. But at the end
Hmm.
of the day, like, I do have that relationship with the Lord, and he does not leave, and he will not
Yeah.
forsake me. Death will not separate that. And God can provide. So when something is taken away, you know,
Yeah.
he can add new things in my life, and that's his grace and that's his provision. So I think like that, when I started to truly understand that, like, that was a huge shift and turning point for me, just personally, as far
Mhm.
as like growth and towards security.
Yeah. Yeah, oh, that's so good. And I mean, the only thoughts I have, as far as growth and security to add is, it's so common for anxious preoccupied to be the person who's the listener, who's the one that takes on everybody else's drama and, absorbs. And, I would encourage anybody who's wanting to gain security in this style to find either mentors or coaches or a spiritual director or some secure person in their life, maybe a therapist that can model giving them back their agency and can help them ask themselves questions and do this work. And that these could just be really good friends that are very healthy and secure, that don't just suck from you all the time. That, like you said, there's that either mutually beneficial or that maybe it's just somebody who gives to you, and that you have that person that pours into you and they know that that's their role, and that's good.
Yeah.
So that would be a really helpful thing to actually look for and establish in your life, to kind of, because they do need that connection piece. Sometimes it's hard because of the lack of self-trust for them to go in and just do it all by themselves. So having a role model to walk them through those steps. And then, yeah, like you said, just growing in self-compassion instead of self-abandonment, growing in self-regulation instead of needing that constant co-regulation. And we'll talk a lot more on this podcast about practical ways to self-regulate and things like that. But yeah, so many good things. This is just a very rich episode if you're an anxious preoccupied to like deep dive. I want to encourage everybody though, before we close out, that we have a download for a free attachment assessment on our website. So we'll put the link in the show notes for you to, if you're still not sure, to really kind of, go through the questions and get a good assessment and score yourself to figure out where you might fall. But then stay tuned also for the next 2 episodes. So thanks, Tamara, for walking through this with me.
Thank you, Jess. I always love our conversations, and I hope that for those listening, I hope that, it was resonating to you and you're able to take anything we said and let it be able to help you on your journey.
Awesome. All right.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Transforming Us podcast. We hope that you enjoyed the conversation and that you found it helpful. If you loved what you heard, we would really appreciate if you would take a moment and leave us a 5-star review and rating. Your support helps us reach more listeners like you.
And also don't forget to follow us on social media and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more relationship content. Then if you're looking to take your growth to the next level, check out our coaching services and groups at transformingus.org.
We're here to help you transform your patterns and enjoy more secure relationships.
Until next time, in the words of Raoul Shane, you do not need to do big things. Just do small things in a big way. Then transformation will follow you.